Clay Morrison's trembling hands cradled the dying black bear, blood pooling beneath the massive steel trap jaws that had crushed its hind leg to bone fragments. The ranger's weathered face went white as the bear's amber eyes locked with his, a moment of profound connection that made his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't supposed to happen in Yellowstone's protected wilderness. Evelyn Patterson dropped her medical bag, the contents scattering across the forest floor as she witnessed what no federal ranger should ever do. Her scream pierced the September air, startling a flock of ravens into chaotic flight above the blood-stained clearing. Clay saw Rebecca in those dying eyes, the same desperate plea for help, the same trust that someone would fight for her life. His wife's voice echoed in his memory. "Save who you can, Clay." "Get the tranquilizer dart," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart. Who had set illegal traps in America's most protected land? And why did this bear's suffering feel like his last chance at redemption? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Clayton Morrison had always believed that some men were born to protect and others were born to take. At 58, with 30 years of service patrolling Yellowstone's vast wilderness, he knew which kind he was. The weathered lines around his blue eyes told stories of countless rescues, lost hikers, injured climbers, and wildlife caught in human-made disasters. But those same lines had deepened considerably in the 3 years since Rebecca's death. The small cabin outside Gardner, Montana, still held traces of his late wife everywhere. Her favorite coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink, a silent testament to the morning routine he couldn't bring himself to change. Each dawn, Clay would set 2 cups on the kitchen counter, pour coffee into both, then realize his mistake and dump the second cup down the drain. "Mornin', Becky," he'd whisper to the wedding photograph on the nightstand, the same ritual that had sustained him through 1,000 lonely mornings. Rebecca Patterson Morrison had been the town's beloved wildlife photographer, known for her fearless expeditions into the backcountry and her uncanny ability to capture the soul of wild animals through her lens. She'd had a laugh that could fill their small home with warmth, and a stubborn streak that drove her to fight for every creature she believed deserved protection. The car accident that claimed her life had left more questions than answers, but Clay had been too consumed by grief to pursue them. Now, 3 years later, those questions haunted his sleepless nights almost as much as the mounting bills on his kitchen table. $47,000 in debt, medical expenses from Rebecca's final weeks, funeral costs, and the weight of a mortgage he could barely manage on a ranger's salary. The foreclosure notice had arrived last month, giving him 60 days to find a solution that seemed impossible. At his age, with mandatory retirement looming at 60, starting over felt like climbing Mount Washburn with a broken leg. His neighbors had tried to help. Evelyn Patterson, Rebecca's 78-year-old grandmother, lived next door in a house filled with memories and cats. She'd been the town's veterinary nurse for 4 decades before retiring, and though she and Clay had grown distant since the funeral, he sometimes caught her watching him with worried eyes from her kitchen window. The guilt of being unable to save Rebecca had built an invisible wall between them. 2 people who loved the same woman, now drowning in their separate griefs. Gardner itself was struggling. The gateway town to Yellowstone had seen tourism decline, leaving local businesses barely surviving. Everyone knew everyone's troubles, and Clay's situation was no secret. Some folks whispered that he should take early retirement, sell the cabin, and move somewhere cheaper. Others, like Sheriff Mason, his old friend from high school, offered quiet support and unspoken understanding. But Clay couldn't leave. This land held his memories of Rebecca, their shared dreams of growing old together while protecting the wilderness they both loved. Every morning patrol reminded him of her presence. and every sunset brought the familiar ache of missing someone who'd made his world complete. The September afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of Douglas fir and lodgepole pine as Clay Morrison made his routine patrol along Specimen Ridge. The familiar weight of his radio, first aid kit, and tranquilizer gun felt comfortable against his hip, tools of a trade he'd mastered over 3 decades. He'd chosen this remote section deliberately, seeking the solitude that had become his refuge since Rebecca's death. Out here, surrounded by the pristine wilderness they'd both loved, he could almost pretend she was just around the next bend, camera in hand, waiting to show him some wonder she'd discovered. The faint whimpering reached his ears just as he crested a small hill overlooking Soda Butte Creek. Clay froze, his trained ear distinguishing the sound from the usual forest chorus of bird calls and rustling leaves. It was a sound of distress, raw and desperate, coming from the dense willows near the water's edge. His hand instinctively moved to his radio, then stopped. Protocol dictated he call for backup before investigating any potentially dangerous wildlife situation, but something about the quality of that cry, the sheer helplessness in it, made him move forward alone. What he found in the small clearing made his blood run cold. A young black bear, maybe 3 or 4 years old, lay trapped in a massive steel contraption that had no business existing in Yellowstone's protected wilderness. The bear's left hind leg was crushed between serrated jaws designed to hold until death, and dark blood had pooled in the pine needles beneath the trap. But it was the bear's eyes that stopped Clay's heart. Amber pools of pain and terror that reminded him instantly of Rebecca's final moments in the hospital when she'd looked at him with that same desperate plea for help. Clay approached slowly, his mind racing through protocols and procedures. The bear should be aggressive, should be fighting or trying to escape, but instead it lay still, watching him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Its breathing was labored, and Clay's experienced eye caught the telltale signs of infection beginning to set in around the wound. Without immediate medical attention, this animal would be dead within hours. The trap itself was military-grade hardware, not the crude snares typically used by poachers. Someone with serious resources and knowledge had placed this deliberately, which raised disturbing questions about who was operating illegally in his territory. As Clay knelt beside the bear, he noticed something that made his pulse quicken. Old scars across the animal's back and shoulders, evidence of previous captivity. This wasn't a wild bear that had wandered into a trap. This was someone's property. His radio crackled to life. "Morrison, what's your 20? We've got reports of shots fired in your sector." Clay's thumb hovered over the response button. Standard procedure was clear. Report the situation, call for wildlife management backup, wait for the proper team with proper equipment. The response time from headquarters would be at least 3 hours, maybe 4, given the remote location. The bear would be dead long before help arrived. "All clear here," Clay lied, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "False alarm on those shots. Probably just someone's truck backfiring on the highway." He clicked off the radio and looked back at the bear. In those amber eyes he saw Rebecca again, not just her final moments, but all the time she'd challenged him to do the right thing even when it was difficult. She'd fought for every wounded animal she'd encountered, sometimes bending rules that others considered sacred. "You can't save them all, Clay," she'd told him once, "but that doesn't mean you stop trying to save the ones you can." The decision crystallized with painful clarity. Clay pulled out his tranquilizer gun, loaded a low-dose dart, and whispered, "Easy, buddy. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to trust me." The bear didn't flinch when the dart found its mark. Instead, it seemed to understand that Clay was trying to help, remaining calm as the mild sedative took effect. Working quickly, Clay used his emergency tools to pry open the trap's jaws, a process that took nearly 45 minutes of careful manipulation. The bear's leg was mangled beyond what his field medical training could properly address, but he cleaned the wound as best he could and applied pressure bandages. Loading a 200-pound bear into his government truck violated so many regulations that Clay stopped counting. But as he secured the animal in the truck bed, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, a sense of purpose that went beyond following orders. This bear needed him, and for the first time since Rebecca's death, someone's life depended entirely on his choices. The abandoned ranger station sat 5 miles off the main road, a relic from the days when Yellowstone's wildlife rehabilitation program had operated independently. Clay had helped shut down the facility 2 years ago due to budget cuts, but the building remained intact, complete with basic medical equipment. As he carried the sedated bear inside, he realized he was crossing a line from which there might be no return. The bear regained consciousness slowly, its amber eyes focusing on Clay with what seemed like recognition. Most wild animals would panic upon waking in an unfamiliar place, but this one simply watched, as if evaluating Clay's intentions. When Clay offered water from his thermos, the bear refused. When he placed emergency rations nearby, the animal showed no interest. Classic trauma response. The same withdrawal Rebecca had shown during her final hospitalization. "I know you're scared," Clay found himself saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it hurts, but I'm not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out together." As darkness fell outside the abandoned station, Clay's radio exploded with activity. "All units, we have a confirmed theft of protected wildlife. Suspect is armed and dangerous. Any ranger encountering unusual activity should report immediately." Clay turned down the volume, his heart pounding as he realized the magnitude of his situation. He was now officially a federal fugitive, harboring stolen government property. But as he looked at the bear, still weak, still vulnerable, still trusting him enough to remain calm, he knew he'd made the only choice his conscience would allow. The bear's eyes never left Clay's face, and in that steady gaze, he found something he'd lost 3 years ago. The certainty that some things were worth risking everything to protect. Outside, search helicopters began their systematic sweep of the area, their spotlights cutting through the forest like mechanical predators. Clay reached for his cell phone to call the one person who might understand what he'd done, then realized he had no signal. He was alone with his decision, alone with this wounded animal, and alone with the growing certainty that tomorrow would change everything. The first rays of dawn crept through the dusty windows of the abandoned ranger station, illuminating Clay's sleepless vigil beside the wounded bear. He'd spent the night monitoring the animal's breathing, changing makeshift bandages, and wrestling with the magnitude of what he'd done. The bear's condition had stabilized somewhat, but infection remained a serious threat without proper veterinary care. Clay had shared his meager dinner rations the night before, speaking in low, comforting tones about Rebecca, about the mountains, about anything that might ease the animal's obvious distress. The sound of an approaching vehicle made Clay's blood freeze. Through the grimy window, he watched a familiar blue pickup truck navigate the overgrown access road. Evelyn Patterson climbed out slowly, her 78-year-old frame moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd spent decades working with injured animals. She carried a large canvas bag that Clay recognized as an old veterinary kit, and her expression was one of grim determination rather than surprise. "I know what you're doing, Clay Morrison," she said without preamble as she entered the station, "and I know why." Her sharp green eyes took in the scene. Clay kneeling beside the bear, the blood-stained bandages, the empty food containers. "That bear needs real surgery, not your field medicine." Clay stood slowly, his joints protesting after a night on the concrete floor. "Evie, you shouldn't be here. If they find you—" "If they find me, they find me," she interrupted, setting down her bag with a decisive thud. "I've been watching the news, Clay. That bear belongs to Harrison Blackstone." The way she spoke the name carried a weight that made Clay's stomach drop. "Who's Harrison Blackstone?" Evelyn's face hardened, aging 10 years in an instant. "The man who's been calling your house for the past month. The man who killed my Rebecca." The words hit Clay like a physical blow. He sank into a nearby chair, his world tilting on its axis. "What are you talking about? Rebecca died in a car accident. You were there at the hospital. You saw—" "I saw what they wanted us to see," Evelyn said, kneeling beside the bear and examining its wounds with professional efficiency. "Harrison Blackstone is one of the wealthiest exotic animal dealers in the country. He owns a luxury hunting preserve in Montana, caters to clients who pay $50,000 to kill animals that can't really fight back." She paused, her hands gentle on the bear's injured leg. Rebecca was investigating his operation for the past 2 years. Clay felt the room spinning around him. "That's impossible. Rebecca was a wildlife photographer. She worked alone. She was working for the Federal Wildlife Crime Unit," Evelyn continued, her voice steady but laden with grief. "Undercover. That's why she was gone so much, why she couldn't always tell you where she was going. She was gathering evidence against Blackstone's entire network." The bear whimpered softly, and both humans turned their attention to him. Evelyn's examination revealed what Clay had suspected. This wasn't a wild animal. Old injection marks dotted his neck and shoulders, evidence of repeated sedation. Faded numbers were tattooed inside his left ear. HB 2019. "His name is Ranger," Evelyn said softly. "Ironic, isn't it? He was captured as a cub 3 years ago when Blackstone's hunters killed his mother. They've been using him for staged hunts, drugging him just enough to make him sluggish, then charging wealthy clients for a guaranteed kill." Clay's hands trembled as he processed this information. "How do you know all this?" "Because Rebecca told me everything the night before she died," Evelyn replied, opening her veterinary kit. She was supposed to testify before a federal grand jury the next week. She had photographs, recordings, financial records, enough to put Blackstone and his entire operation away forever. The older woman's hands worked efficiently, preparing surgical instruments on a makeshift sterile field. Her car accident happened on Highway 89 right after she left a meeting with federal prosecutors. Single vehicle, no witnesses, car went off the road into Yankee Jim Canyon. She looked up at Clay, her eyes fierce with long-suppressed anger. "Rebecca was the best driver I ever knew. She could handle a car in a Montana blizzard better than most people could on a sunny day." Clay felt something breaking inside his chest, a dam of grief and confusion that had been holding back 3 years of unanswered questions. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Why didn't the FBI?" "Because Blackstone has connections everywhere," Evelyn said, beginning to clean Ranger's wound with professional precision. "Judges, politicians, law enforcement. Rebecca knew she was in danger, but she also knew that if something happened to her, the only person she could trust was you. She left instructions, Clay. Evidence hidden in places only you would think to look." Ranger remained remarkably calm during Evelyn's examination, his amber eyes fixed on Clay as if drawing strength from his presence. The bear's trust was absolute, childlike in its simplicity, and it stirred something protective in Clay that he hadn't felt since Rebecca's death. "The insurance money," Clay said suddenly. "She left $200,000. I never understood why she had such a large policy." "She was protecting you," Evelyn replied, threading surgical suture. "All the evidence is hidden in the policy documents. Photographs, bank records, testimonies from other victims. She knew that if Blackstone killed her, you'd eventually find everything and finish what she started." Clay watched Evelyn work on Ranger's mangled leg, her hands steady despite her age. The bear seemed to understand that she was helping him, occasionally making soft, huffing sounds that might have been gratitude. The sight of this wounded animal accepting care from humans who'd shown him nothing but kindness struck Clay as profoundly moving. "I can't do this surgery here," Evelyn said after a thorough examination. "He needs a real operating room, proper anesthesia, equipment I don't have. But if we take him to a veterinary hospital, Blackstone's people will find him within hours. Then what do you suggest?" Evelyn sat back on her heels, studying Clay with the same intensity she'd just focused on Ranger's injuries. "I suggest we do what Rebecca would have done. We fight back. But first, we save this bear properly." She reached into her bag and pulled out a cell phone. "I'm calling Dr. Sarah Chen at the Veterinary College in Bozeman. She's Rebecca's old friend, someone we can trust. She'll perform the surgery quietly, no questions asked." As Evelyn made the call, Clay found himself studying Ranger more closely. The bear's intelligence was obvious. He seemed to understand the conversation happening around him, his head turning between the two humans as if following their words. When Clay extended his hand slowly, Ranger sniffed it carefully, then rested his massive head against Clay's palm. "He's chosen you," Evelyn observed, ending her call. "Sarah can see him tonight, but we need to move carefully. Blackstone's men are already searching the area." Clay felt the weight of Ranger's head in his hand, warm and trusting and absolutely dependent on his protection. For the first time in 3 years, someone needed him completely, without reservation or complication. The bear had suffered because of human greed and cruelty, had lost his mother and his freedom to men like Blackstone. But unlike Rebecca, Ranger was still alive, still fighting, still capable of being saved. "What about the evidence?" Clay asked. "If Rebecca really documented Blackstone's crimes—" "One step at a time," Evelyn said firmly. "First, we save Ranger. Then we finish what Rebecca started." She paused, her weathered hand resting on Ranger's shoulder. "She'd be proud of what you did, Clay. Taking this risk, breaking the rules to save someone who couldn't save himself." Clay's radio crackled to life again. "Morrison, respond to your location immediately. Federal agents are requesting all Ranger personnel report for questioning regarding the missing wildlife." Clay turned off the radio and looked at Evelyn, then at Ranger. The bear's amber eyes held his gaze steadily, and in that moment, Clay made a decision that would change everything. "Let's get him to Bozeman," he said. "It's time to finish this." The veterinary college at Montana State University operated around the clock, but Dr. Sarah Chen had never performed surgery on a stolen federal bear at 2 in the morning. Clay watched through the observation window as she worked with methodical precision, her small hands moving confidently despite the illegal circumstances. Ranger lay sedated on the stainless steel table, his massive form looking vulnerable under the harsh surgical lights. "He's going to make it," Evelyn said softly, standing beside Clay in the darkened hallway. "Sarah's the best veterinary surgeon in the state. If anyone can repair that leg properly, it's her." Clay nodded, but his attention was divided between the surgery and the conversation he'd had with Harrison Blackstone 3 hours earlier. The man's voice had been smooth, cultured, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through charm or intimidation. "Ranger Morrison, I believe you have something of mine," Blackstone had said when Clay answered his cell phone. "I don't know what you're talking about," Clay had replied, though his hands were shaking as he spoke. "Of course you do. A black bear, approximately 4 years old, with distinctive scarring on his back. His name is Ranger, quite fitting considering your profession. I'd like him back." The casual way Blackstone discussed the bear as property had made Clay's blood boil, but he'd kept his voice steady. "There are a lot of bears in Yellowstone, Mr. Blackstone. You'll have to be more specific." Blackstone's laugh had been cold. "Let's meet tonight. Upscale restaurant called the Northern Pines in Billings. 9 o'clock. I have something you'll want to see." Now, 4 hours after that meeting, Clay was still processing what he'd learned. Blackstone had shown him photographs, crime scene photos from Rebecca's accident that weren't part of the official investigation. Shots taken from angles that suggested someone had been watching, waiting, documenting. The implication was clear without being stated directly. "Your wife was a talented photographer," Blackstone had said over expensive wine, his tone conversational. "She had quite an eye for capturing things that weren't meant to be seen. Unfortunately, sometimes people who see too much have accidents." Clay had worn the wire that Evelyn insisted he use, a small recording device hidden in his jacket pocket. Now, listening to the playback through earphones, he heard his own voice responding with forced calm to Blackstone's veiled threats. "What do you want?" Clay had asked. "It's simple," Blackstone had replied. "You return my property, and I make certain financial problems disappear. I understand you're facing foreclosure on your home. $47,000, isn't it? I'm prepared to pay off your mortgage entirely, plus an additional $50,000 for your inconvenience." The offer had been tempting for exactly 3 seconds before Clay remembered Ranger's trusting amber eyes. "And if I refuse? Then you'll discover that accidents can be hereditary." Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite, pulling off her gloves with obvious exhaustion. "The surgery went well," she reported. "I was able to save the leg, though he'll always have a slight limp. The infection was more advanced than I'd hoped, but antibiotics should handle it." She paused, studying Clay's face. "This bear has been through hell. The scarring on his back suggests repeated electrical shock treatment, probably used to make him submissive during those staged hunts." Clay felt sick. "Will he recover fully?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally?" Sarah shrugged. "Bears are remarkably resilient, but trauma leaves marks." "The fact that he trusted you enough to remain calm during treatment suggests he's capable of forming attachments. That's actually unusual for a bear his age, especially one that's been abused." Evelyn had been quiet during the medical discussion, but now she spoke up. "We need to move him somewhere safe while he recovers. Blackstone will have people watching the obvious places." "I know a place," Sarah said. "My family owns a ranch about 50 miles south of here. It's remote, has outbuildings we could convert temporarily. But Clay, you need to understand, if the federal authorities find out I've been treating a stolen bear, I could lose my license." Clay looked through the window at Ranger, still unconscious but breathing steadily. The bear had lost his mother, his freedom, and nearly his life because of human greed. Now he was trusting Clay to protect him, and Clay was discovering that trust carried a weight he hadn't expected. "There's something else," Evelyn said, pulling a thick manila envelope from her bag. "I found these in Rebecca's things after she died. I've been afraid to show them to anyone, but after tonight—" She handed the envelope to Clay. "She documented everything, Clay. Every illegal transaction, every staged hunt, every bribed official." The photographs inside the envelope made Clay's stomach turn. Wealthy men posing with drugged animals that couldn't defend themselves. Bears, wolves, even a young mountain lion, all displaying the glazed eyes of heavy sedation while their killers celebrated. But it was the financial records that truly shocked him. Bank transfers totaling millions of dollars, payments to judges, senators, wildlife officials. She was building a federal case, Evelyn continued, but she knew Blackstone was getting suspicious. That's why she hid everything in multiple locations, why she set up the insurance policy the way she did. One photograph showed Ranger as a cub, maybe 6 months old, cowering in a steel cage while Blackstone stood nearby holding an electric cattle prod. The bear's mother lay dead in the background, her massive form sprawled unnaturally beside what looked like a feeding station designed to attract her. "They used the cub as bait," Clay said, his voice barely controlled. They killed his mother while she was trying to protect him. Rebecca's notes say that's Blackstone's preferred method, Evelyn replied. Kill the mother, take the cubs, train them for the hunting preserve. He's been doing it for 15 years. Clay studied the evidence spread across the hospital conference room table. Rebecca had been meticulous, documenting not just Blackstone's crimes, but his entire network. Shipping manifests showing illegal animal transports across state lines. Hotel receipts from hunting weekends that cost clients more than most people earned in a year. Communications with similar operations in Texas, Colorado, and Alaska. Why didn't she just turn this over to the FBI immediately? Clay asked. Because half the people she would have reported to are on Blackstone's payroll, Evelyn said grimly. Look at page 15. Clay found the page and felt his blood chill. A list of payments to federal wildlife officials, including the current regional director and 2 federal judges. No wonder the investigation into Rebecca's death had been perfunctory. She was waiting to find an honest prosecutor, Evelyn continued. Someone outside Blackstone's reach. She thought she'd found one in Denver, but she gestured helplessly. A soft whimpering from the recovery room interrupted their conversation. Clay hurried to check on Ranger, finding the bear awake and alert, his amber eyes searching the unfamiliar room until they found Clay's face. The relief in that gaze was unmistakable. "Hey there, buddy," Clay said softly, approaching the recovery cage slowly. "How are you feeling?" Ranger struggled to sit up, favoring his bandaged leg but showing remarkable determination. When Clay extended his hand through the cage bars, the bear sniffed it carefully, then pressed his massive head against Clay's palm. The gesture was so trusting, so completely vulnerable, that Clay felt tears threatening. "He's bonded with you," Sarah observed, watching from the doorway. "That's extraordinary. Most bears his age would still be aggressive, especially after what he's been through." "What does that mean?" Clay asked. "It means he considers you family," Sarah replied. "Bears don't make that distinction lightly. Once they accept you, they'll defend you with their lives." The implications of that statement settled over Clay like a weight. Ranger wasn't just an animal he'd rescued. He was a responsibility, a living being who had chosen to trust him completely. The bear had lost everything to human cruelty, and now Clay was all he had. Evelyn joined them at the cage, and Ranger's reaction was interesting. While he didn't show the same immediate affection he displayed toward Clay, he didn't retreat either. Instead, he watched her with curious intelligence, as if evaluating her intentions. "We need a plan," Evelyn said. "Blackstone gave you 48 hours to produce Ranger. That was 6 hours ago." Clay looked at the evidence scattered on the conference table, then at Ranger's trusting face. "What if we don't run? What if we fight back instead?" "Clay, this man has killed before," Evelyn warned. "He has resources, connections, money. We're talking about taking on someone who owns judges." "Rebecca took him on," Clay pointed out. "She gathered all this evidence knowing the risks." "Maybe it's time to finish what she started." Sarah cleared her throat. "If you're serious about exposing Blackstone, you'll need more than photographs and financial records. You'll need witnesses, live testimony from people who've seen his operation firsthand." "Like who?" Clay asked. "Like me," Sarah said quietly. 3 years ago, I was called to treat animals at a private hunting preserve near Glacier National Park. I thought it was legitimate until I saw what they were doing to those animals. Bears so drugged they could barely stand, wolves with their tendons cut to prevent them from running. I reported it to wildlife authorities and was told the investigation was ongoing. Nothing ever came of it. Clay felt pieces clicking into place. "You could testify about what you witnessed." "I could do more than that," Sarah said. "I kept tissue samples from the animals I treated. DNA evidence that could prove they were taken from protected lands." Ranger made a soft, huffing sound, drawing their attention back to his cage. Despite his injuries and the trauma he'd endured, there was something dignified about the way he held himself, something that spoke to an unbroken spirit. "Look at him," Clay said. "After everything they did to him, he's still willing to trust, still fighting to survive. Rebecca would say that's worth protecting." Evelyn nodded slowly. She always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the right thing despite being terrified. "Then we need to be terrified together," Clay decided. "Because I'm not giving him back to Blackstone, and I'm not running away from this fight." As if understanding the conversation, Ranger pressed closer to the cage bars, his amber eyes fixed on Clay's face with absolute trust. In that moment, Clay realized that saving Ranger wasn't just about protecting one bear. It was about honoring Rebecca's memory, finishing her work, and proving that sometimes the broken could find each other and become whole again. "All right," Sarah said with determination. "Let's bring down Harrison Blackstone." The call came at dawn, just as Clay was dozing in the chair beside Ranger's recovery cage. Harrison Blackstone's voice was different this time, harder, more urgent, stripped of the polite veneer from their restaurant meeting. "Your time is up, Morrison. I want my bear back, and I want him now." Clay glanced at Ranger, who was awake and alert despite the early hour, those amber eyes tracking every sound. "I told you, I don't have any bear." "Cut the bullshit. My tracking equipment shows he's been stationary for the past 8 hours. Either you bring him to me, or I come get him myself." Blackstone's breathing was audible through the phone. "And Morrison, when I come, I won't be alone." The line went dead. Clay stared at the phone, his mind racing. Tracking equipment meant Ranger had some kind of implanted device, which explained how Blackstone had found him so quickly after his escape. "Doctor." Chen had mentioned finding scar tissue during surgery, but hadn't thought to look for electronics. "Sarah," Clay called urgently. "We need to scan Ranger again. Blackstone has been tracking him." Within an hour, they'd located the GPS chip embedded beneath the scarred tissue on Ranger's shoulder blade. The device was military-grade, barely larger than a grain of rice, and had been transmitting Ranger's location continuously for 3 days. "I can remove it," Sarah said, examining the chip under a magnifying lens, "but he'll need local anesthesia, and there's risk of infection if we're not careful." Clay looked at Ranger, who seemed to sense the tension in the room. The bear had been through so much already, and now they were asking him to endure another medical procedure. But as Clay met those trusting amber eyes, he knew they had no choice. "Do it," he said, "but we need to move fast. If Blackstone's been watching our location, he knows exactly where we are." As Sarah prepared for the minor surgery, Evelyn spread Rebecca's evidence across the conference table one more time. "Clay, even if we remove the tracker, Blackstone won't just give up. This bear represents millions of dollars in potential revenue to him." "Then what do you suggest?" Evelyn's weathered hands sorted through the photographs and documents. "We force his hand, make him come to us on our terms, not his." "How?" "We go public. Every news station, every social media platform, every wildlife advocacy group in the country. We show them these photographs, tell them about Ranger's story, make Blackstone's operation too hot for him to touch." Clay considered this, while Sarah worked on removing the tracking chip. Ranger remained remarkably calm during the procedure, only flinching slightly when the local anesthetic was administered. His trust in these humans who had shown him nothing but kindness seemed absolute. "There's a problem with going public," Clay said. "I'm technically a federal fugitive right now. The moment my name hits the news, every law enforcement agency in Montana will be looking for me." "Not if we do this right," Sarah interjected, carefully extracting the tiny device. "What if we don't make you the story? What if we make Ranger the story?" She held up the GPS chip, its LED light still blinking steadily. "This little device, proves everything. No wild bear has military-grade tracking equipment implanted in his body. The moment the media sees this, they'll start asking questions Blackstone can't answer. Evelyn nodded approvingly. Rebecca always said the best way to fight corruption was with transparency. Make the truth so public that powerful people can't hide from it. Clay watched Ranger lick the small surgical site where the chip had been removed. The bear's resilience continued to amaze him. Despite everything he'd endured, Ranger seemed determined to trust, to heal, to move forward. "All right," Clay decided. "But we need somewhere safe to make our stand. Blackstone's going to bring serious firepower when he comes looking." "I know a place," Evelyn said quietly. "Rebecca's old photography cabin, up near Glacier National Park. It's remote, defensible, and—" She paused, emotion creeping into her voice. "It's where she kept her most important work. Seems fitting." They moved quickly, transferring Ranger to a specially modified horse trailer that Sarah's ranch used for transporting large animals. The bear seemed to understand they were traveling again, settling into the spacious compartment with calm acceptance. Clay rode in the back with him, maintaining the physical contact that seemed to comfort both of them. The cabin sat in a high mountain valley, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through dense forest. Rebecca had chosen the location for its spectacular wildlife photography opportunities, but Clay immediately saw its defensive advantages. Anyone approaching would be visible for miles, and the surrounding terrain offered multiple escape routes. Inside the cabin, Rebecca's presence was overwhelming. Her cameras still sat on their tripods, pointed toward the windows where she'd photographed eagles and mountain sheep. Her notebooks filled with observations about animal behavior lay open on the desk, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. Clay found himself standing before a wall covered with her photographs. Not the staged shots she'd sold to magazines, but the raw, honest images of wildlife in their natural state. Bears teaching cubs to fish, wolves playing with their young, elk moving majestically through morning mist. These were the images she'd loved most, the ones that captured the soul of the wilderness she'd died trying to protect. "She spent the last month of her life here," Evelyn said, joining Clay at the photo wall, working frantically to compile evidence against Blackstone, knowing she was running out of time. Ranger explored the cabin with curious intelligence, his nose cataloging every scent. When he reached Rebecca's desk, he paused, his head tilting as if he sensed something significant about the space. Clay watched in amazement as the bear gently touched his nose to one of Rebecca's notebooks, then looked back at Clay with an expression that seemed almost knowing. "He knows," Evelyn said softly. "Animals understand more than we give them credit for. He knows this place was important to someone who mattered to you." Clay's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I know where you are, Morrison. Surrender my property or face the consequences." Instead of responding, Clay began implementing their plan. Using Rebecca's satellite internet connection, he uploaded high-resolution images of Blackstone's illegal operation to every major news outlet and wildlife advocacy organization in the country. The photos of drugged bears, the financial records showing payments to corrupt officials, the documentation of illegal animal trafficking, everything Rebecca had died trying to expose. Sarah had driven back to town to coordinate media contacts, using her veterinary credentials to lend credibility to their claims. Within hours, the story was spreading across social media platforms, gaining momentum as people shared the shocking images and demanded investigations. "Montana wildlife trafficking ring exposed" became the top trending topic on Twitter. Cable news networks picked up the story, with wildlife experts expressing outrage at the staged hunting operations. The FBI's Montana field office announced they were opening an investigation based on credible evidence of federal wildlife crimes. But Blackstone wasn't waiting for legal proceedings. Clay's radio, monitoring law enforcement frequencies, crackled with reports of armed men moving through the forest below the cabin, professional hunters tracking them with military precision. "They're coming," Clay told Evelyn and Ranger. "At least 6 vehicles, probably twice that many men." Ranger seemed to sense the approaching danger. His ears perked up, and he moved protectively closer to Clay, a low growl rumbling in his chest. For the first time since his rescue, the bear looked ready to fight. "There's something you should know," Evelyn said, checking the rifle she'd brought from the cabin's gun cabinet. Rebecca left one final piece of evidence, something she said was too dangerous to include with the rest. She led Clay to a hidden compartment behind Rebecca's bookshelf, revealing a waterproof case containing a single flash drive. Security camera footage from Blackstone's private office. Recordings of him ordering Rebecca's murder, planning other killings, coordinating with corrupt officials. Clay stared at the drive, understanding its significance. This wasn't just evidence, it was a death sentence for Blackstone and everyone in his network. Why didn't she turn this over before she died? Because she knew that as long as this existed, they'd never stop hunting for it. She was protecting you, Clay. But now, Evelyn's eyes were fierce with determination. Now, it's time to finish this. The sound of engines grew closer. Through the cabin windows, Clay could see muzzle flashes in the forest below as Blackstone's men took positions around the valley. They were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of time. But as Clay looked at Ranger, scarred but unbroken, traumatized but still capable of trust, he realized that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Rebecca had died trying to expose the truth. Now, it was his turn to finish what she'd started. "Whatever happens," he told Ranger, "we face it together." The bear pressed against Clay's leg, his amber eyes reflecting the same determination Clay felt burning in his own chest. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, but inside the cabin, man and bear prepared to make their stand. The first shot shattered the cabin's front window, sending glass cascading across Rebecca's photography equipment. Clay dove behind the heavy oak desk, pulling Ranger with him as bullets splintered the wooden walls around them. Evelyn crouched near the back door, her hunting rifle ready, her 78-year-old hands steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Morrison!" Blackstone's voice carried across the valley, amplified by a megaphone. "Send out my bear, and this ends peacefully. You have 60 seconds to decide." Clay peered through the broken window and counted at least 8 men positioned in the tree line, all carrying military-style weapons. These weren't ordinary hunters. They moved with the precision of professionals, former military or private contractors who killed for money. Blackstone had brought an army to reclaim what he considered his property. Ranger pressed close to Clay's side, his massive body trembling not with fear, but with barely contained rage. The bear's amber eyes were fixed on the broken window, and Clay could hear a low growling deep in his chest. After months of abuse and captivity, Ranger recognized the sound of his tormentors returning. "There's no peaceful end to this," Clay called back. "Not while you're still breathing." The response was immediate and devastating. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, turning the cabin into a shooting gallery. Clay grabbed Rebecca's satellite phone and dialed 911, shouting over the noise to report their location and the armed assault in progress. But help was at least 30 minutes away, and they might not survive the next 30 seconds. A bullet caught Evelyn in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her rifle clattering across the floor. She pressed herself against the wall, blood seeping between her fingers as she tried to apply pressure to the wound. "I'm okay," she gasped, though her face had gone pale. "Just a graze." Clay knew she was lying. The expanding red stain on her shirt suggested the bullet had done serious damage, but there was no time for medical attention. Outside, Blackstone's men were advancing, using the covering fire to move closer to the cabin. "They're going to rush us," Clay said, checking his own weapon, a hunting rifle with limited ammunition. When they do, take Ranger out the back door. Head for the creek and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," Evelyn said through gritted teeth. "And I'm not leaving either of you," Clay replied, though he knew their situation was hopeless. Blackstone had come prepared for war, while they had 2 rifles and a wounded bear who'd already endured more trauma than any living creature should survive. A shadow moved past the side window and Clay fired instinctively. His shot was rewarded with a cry of pain and the sound of a body hitting the ground, but it had also revealed his position. Return fire chewed up the desk behind which he was hiding, forcing him to crawl toward the kitchen area. That's when he noticed Ranger wasn't following him. The bear had positioned himself directly in front of the broken front window, his massive frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. Despite his injured leg, despite the bandages still wrapped around his midsection, Ranger stood like a sentinel, blocking the most obvious entry point into the cabin. "Get back here," Clay hissed, but Ranger ignored him. The bear's attention was focused entirely on the approaching men, and something in his posture suggested he was done running from his captors. 2 of Blackstone's mercenaries appeared at the front door, weapons raised, confident that their overwhelming firepower had already broken any resistance. They saw Ranger immediately and hesitated, not from fear, but from recognition. "It's him," one of them said. "The boss's prize bear. Just trank him," the other replied, pulling out a dart gun. "Blackstone wants him alive." That hesitation cost them everything. Ranger exploded into motion with a speed that defied his injuries, covering the distance to the door in 2 powerful bounds. The first mercenary got off 1 tranquilizer dart that struck Ranger in the shoulder, but the bear's momentum carried him forward anyway. 400 pounds of enraged black bear hit the man like a freight train, sending him flying backward off the cabin's front porch. The second mercenary tried to retreat, but Ranger was already on him. The bear's massive paw swept the man's legs out from under him, and suddenly the predator had become the prey. The man's screams echoed across the valley, alerting his companions to the fact that their easy assault had just become a nightmare. Clay watched in amazement as Ranger systematically dismantled Blackstone's assault team. The bear moved with calculated fury, using his size and strength to devastating effect while somehow avoiding the vital areas that would have meant certain death for his opponents. He was defending his territory, his family, but he wasn't a killer by nature. The tranquilizer dart was beginning to take effect, though. Clay could see Ranger's movements becoming sluggish, his coordination deteriorating as the drug worked through his system. The bear was fighting not just Blackstone's men, but time itself. "Fall back! Fall back!" The command echoed from the forest as the surviving mercenaries regrouped. They'd expected to face a scared park ranger and an elderly woman, not a battle-hardened bear with a personal vendetta against their employer. Clay used the momentary respite to check on Evelyn, whose wound was worse than she'd admitted. The bullet had shattered her collarbone, and she was going into shock from blood loss. "Stay with me, Evie," he said, applying pressure to the wound with his shirt. "Help is coming." "Don't let them take him," she whispered, her eyes fierce despite her pain. "Promise me, Clay. Don't let them take Ranger back to that hell." Through the broken window, Clay could see Blackstone himself emerging from an armored SUV, his expensive hunting clothes replaced by tactical gear. The man's face was twisted with rage as he surveyed the casualties his simple retrieval operation had produced. "Burn it," Blackstone ordered. "Burn the whole place down. If I can't have my bear back, then nobody gets him." Clay's blood went cold as he saw one of the mercenaries producing an incendiary device. They were going to torch the cabin with all of them inside. Evidence, witnesses, and Ranger all destroyed in one final act of spite. Ranger, despite the tranquilizer coursing through his system, seemed to understand the new threat. He moved unsteadily back toward Clay and Evelyn, positioning himself between them and the approaching flames. Even drugged and wounded, the bear's protective instincts remained intact. "I won't let you burn," Clay promised, though he had no idea how to keep that promise. They were trapped in a wooden cabin surrounded by armed men, with a wounded woman, a drugged bear, and no way out. That's when Clay noticed Rebecca's photography equipment, still functioning despite the gunfire. Her motion-activated cameras had been recording everything: Blackstone's assault, his orders to burn the cabin, his men's attempts to murder federal witnesses. The entire confrontation was being documented in high definition and automatically uploaded to her cloud storage account. The world was watching. The FBI, the media, wildlife advocacy groups, everyone Rebecca had died trying to reach was now seeing Blackstone's true nature in real time. The man who'd built his empire on shadows and silence was finally being exposed to the light. But exposure wouldn't save them from the flames already beginning to lick at the cabin's walls. Clay gathered Ranger and Evelyn close, preparing for what might be their final moments together. The bear, despite his drugged state, pressed protectively against both humans, offering what comfort he could as the smoke began to fill the room. In the distance, Clay could hear the sound of helicopters approaching fast. Federal agents, state police, maybe even military units responding to the reports of armed assault on federal officers. Help was coming, but it might arrive too late to save them from Blackstone's final act of vengeance. As the flames crept closer and the smoke grew thicker, Clay held on to the two beings he'd come to love most in the world: an elderly woman who'd shown him the truth about his wife's death, and a wounded bear who'd taught him that trust could survive even the worst betrayal. Whatever happened next, they would face it as a family. The FBI helicopters descended through the smoke like mechanical angels, their rotors beating a rhythm that drowned out the crackling flames consuming the cabin's exterior walls. Clay pressed his face against the back window, watching federal agents rappel down into the forest with military precision. But even as hope flickered in his chest, he knew they might be too late. The fire was spreading too quickly, and Ranger was barely conscious from the tranquilizer dart. "Clay!" Evelyn's voice was weak but urgent. She was pointing toward Rebecca's desk, where flames were licking at a metal filing cabinet. The safe. Behind the bookshelf. Rebecca's final recordings. Clay understood immediately. Whatever evidence Rebecca had hidden there would be destroyed within minutes if he didn't act. But moving meant leaving Ranger's side, and the bear was struggling to stay upright, his amber eyes glazed with drugs and exhaustion. As if sensing Clay's dilemma, Ranger made a tremendous effort to focus, pressing his massive head against Clay's hand in a gesture that seemed to say, "Go." The bear's trust, even in his drugged state, was absolute. He understood that something important was at stake. Clay crawled through the smoke to the hidden compartment, his lungs burning as he retrieved the waterproof case containing Rebecca's final evidence. Inside, along with the flash drive Evelyn had mentioned, was something else, a letter addressed to him in Rebecca's careful handwriting. "My dearest Clay," it began, "if you're reading this, then Blackstone has succeeded in silencing me, but not in destroying the truth. The flash drive contains everything: recordings of him ordering my death, communications with his network of corrupt officials, financial records that will bring down his entire operation. But more than that, it contains proof that you were never supposed to be involved in this fight. I chose to love you, chose to marry you, chose to build a life with you, because I knew that if anything happened to me, you would have the courage to finish what I started. Take care of each other, Clay. Take care of the wounded things that need protecting. That's what love really means." Through his tears and the thickening smoke, Clay saw Blackstone himself approaching the burning cabin, a high-powered rifle in his hands. The man's face was a mask of rage and desperation. His empire was crumbling around him as federal agents rounded up his mercenaries, but he was determined to eliminate the witnesses who could testify against him. "Morrison!" Blackstone shouted over the sound of approaching sirens and helicopter blades. "Come out and face me like a man, or burn like the coward you are." Clay looked at Ranger, who was fighting the tranquilizer's effects with every ounce of his considerable will. The bear's eyes were clearer now, focused with deadly intensity on the sound of Blackstone's voice. Despite his injuries, despite the drugs, Ranger recognized his tormentor. But it was Evelyn who spoke the truth that changed everything. "Clay," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos outside, "Rebecca was pregnant when she died." The words hit Clay like a physical blow. He stared at Evelyn in shock, unable to process what she'd just revealed. "What?" "6 weeks along," Evelyn continued, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "She was going to tell you after she finished exposing Blackstone. She wanted the world to be safe for your child before she shared the news." Clay felt something break and reshape itself inside his chest. Rebecca hadn't just been murdered. Their unborn child had been killed, too. Blackstone hadn't just destroyed Clay's past, he'd obliterated their future together. The grief and rage that flooded through him was so intense it nearly drove him to his knees. Ranger, as if sensing Clay's emotional devastation, struggled to his feet. The bear's legs were unsteady, but his resolve was iron. He moved toward the cabin's front door, positioning himself between Clay and the approaching killer. Even drugged, even wounded, Ranger was ready to defend his chosen family with his life. "You want to face someone?" Clay called out to Blackstone, his voice hoarse with smoke and emotion. "Then face the bear whose mother you murdered. Face the animal you tortured for 3 years. Face the victim who survived everything you could do to break him." Blackstone's laughter was cold and bitter. "That animal is my property, Morrison. I made him what he is. I own him." "Nobody owns him," Clay replied, opening the cabin's front door, "and nobody ever will again." Ranger stepped through the doorway with surprising grace considering his condition. The tranquilizer was still affecting his coordination, but his intelligence remained sharp. He assessed the situation quickly. One man with a rifle, several vehicles for potential escape, multiple federal agents moving through the forest toward their position. Blackstone raised his weapon, aiming directly at Ranger's head. "I'd rather kill him than let him go free. He's worth nothing to me if he's not under my control." But before he could fire, federal agents burst from the tree line, their weapons trained on Blackstone and his remaining mercenaries. "FBI, drop your weapons immediately!" The confrontation stretched into a tense standoff, with Blackstone realizing his situation was hopeless but refusing to surrender. He kept his rifle trained on Ranger while federal snipers acquired their own targets. One wrong move from anyone would result in a bloodbath. That's when Ranger made his choice. Instead of charging Blackstone or retreating to safety, the bear did something unexpected. He sat down, not in submission or fear, but in a posture of calm dignity that spoke volumes about his character. Despite everything Blackstone had done to him, Ranger refused to become a killer. He would defend those he loved, but he wouldn't be reduced to the level of his tormentor. The gesture had a profound effect on everyone present. Federal agents who had been prepared for a violent confrontation with a dangerous wild animal instead saw a wounded creature choosing peace over vengeance. Blackstone, who had spent years trying to break Ranger's spirit, was confronted with evidence that he had failed completely. "You see," Clay said, his voice carrying across the standoff, "that's the difference between you and him. You destroy things because you can. He protects things because he chooses to." Agent Sarah Martinez, the FBI's lead investigator, stepped forward with her hands visible but ready to draw her weapon. "Mr. Blackstone, you're surrounded by federal agents. Your entire operation has been compromised. Surrender now, and we can discuss terms." Blackstone's face twisted with the realization that his empire was finished. The evidence Clay had uploaded was already circulating through news networks, social media, and law enforcement agencies across the country. The corruption network he'd spent decades building was collapsing in real time. "Terms?" Blackstone spat. "I know what my terms are. Life in prison for racketeering, murder, conspiracy. You think I'm going to spend my remaining years in a cage like the animals I sold?" He swung his rifle toward Agent Martinez, and that's when Ranger moved. Despite the tranquilizer, despite his injuries, the bear launched himself forward with incredible speed. Not to attack Blackstone, but to shield the federal agent from the rifle shot that echoed across the valley. The bullet struck Ranger in the chest, and he collapsed just feet away from Blackstone. Federal snipers immediately returned fire, dropping Blackstone where he stood. But Clay's attention was entirely focused on Ranger, who was struggling to breathe as blood spread across his dark fur. "No!" Clay screamed, rushing to Ranger's side. "Not him too! You can't take him too!" Agent Martinez was already calling for medical evacuation as Clay knelt beside the wounded bear. Ranger's amber eyes found Clay's face, and in them was no regret, no fear, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had chosen to protect rather than destroy. "You saved her," Clay whispered, his hands pressing against Ranger's wound to slow the bleeding. "You saved someone you didn't even know because it was the right thing to do." Emergency veterinary teams arrived within minutes, but Ranger's condition was critical. The bullet had punctured his lung and lodged near his heart. As they prepared to airlift him to the trauma center, Clay made a promise that would define the rest of his life. "I'll make sure your sacrifice means something," he told Ranger as the bear was loaded onto the helicopter. "I'll make sure every animal Blackstone hurt gets justice. I'll make sure the world knows what you really are. Not property, not a victim, but a hero who chose love over hatred." As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, carrying Ranger toward an uncertain future, Clay stood among the smoking ruins of Rebecca's cabin, holding the evidence that would finally bring justice for his wife, their unborn child, and every animal that had suffered under Blackstone's cruel empire. The truth was finally free, but the cost had been almost more than he could bear. 6 months later, Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear over the Morrison Wildlife Sanctuary, where fresh snow blanketed the rolling hills of what had once been Rebecca's family ranch. Clay stood on the front porch of the new visitor center, watching Ranger play in the snow with 2 bear cubs who had been rescued from another illegal operation in Colorado. The bullet scar across Ranger's chest was barely visible now beneath his thick winter coat, but the emotional scars had healed into something beautiful, a deep capacity for protecting others that had made him the perfect surrogate father for orphaned wildlife. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the medical facility, her pregnant belly prominent beneath her winter coat. At 7 months, she carried the promise of new life that had transformed Clay's world in ways he was still discovering. "He's teaching them how to find food under the snow," she observed, watching Ranger patiently demonstrate digging techniques to the eager cubs. "Look how gentle he is with them." Clay wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, marveling at how life had given him a second chance at family he'd never thought possible. "He understands what it means to lose a parent," Clay said. "He's determined that these cubs will know they're loved." Evelyn Patterson, now the sanctuary's official manager despite her age, approached with her characteristic blend of warmth and authority. Her shoulder had healed well from the gunshot, though she claimed the cold weather made it ache. "The governor's arriving in an hour for the dedication ceremony," she announced. "Channel 7 wants to interview you and Ranger together for their Christmas special." The sanctuary had become a symbol of hope that resonated far beyond Montana's borders. Built with the settlement money from Rebecca's wrongful death lawsuit and donations that had poured in from around the world, it provided permanent homes for wildlife that couldn't be returned to the wild. But more than that, it had become a place where broken things, both animal and human, could heal together. Sheriff Mason arrived with his grandchildren, who had become regular visitors to the sanctuary. 8-year-old Emma ran directly to Ranger's enclosure, calling out, "Uncle Ranger," with the fearless enthusiasm of childhood. The bear immediately abandoned his lesson with the cubs to approach the fence, gently pressing his nose against the girl's outstretched hand through the protective barriers. "It still amazes me," Mason said to Clay. "A year ago that bear was a terrified victim, and now look at him. He's become the heart of this whole operation." Clay nodded, watching Ranger interact with the children who visited regularly. The bear had an intuitive understanding of how to be gentle with the young and vulnerable, perhaps because he remembered his own trauma so clearly. Dr. Chen says he's displaying textbook parenting behaviors with the cubs. It's like he's healing by taking care of others. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of visitors, including wildlife officials, politicians, and families who had followed Ranger's story through the media coverage. When Governor Patricia Williams unveiled the bronze plaque reading, "Rebecca Patterson Morrison Wildlife Sanctuary, where love heals the broken," there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Clay's speech was brief but heartfelt. "My wife Rebecca believed that protecting wildlife wasn't just about preserving species. It was about preserving the capacity for compassion in ourselves. This sanctuary exists because a wounded bear chose to protect others instead of seeking revenge. Because he chose love over hatred, trust over fear, healing over brokenness." The most moving moment came when Clay introduced Ranger to the gathered crowd. The bear, now wearing a specially designed collar that identified him as a sanctuary ambassador, approached the observation area with dignity and calm. Children pressed against the safety barriers while parents wiped away tears, moved by the sight of an animal who had survived so much trauma, yet radiated such peace. Ranger teaches us that resilience isn't about forgetting the past, Clay continued. It's about transforming pain into purpose, trauma into compassion. He could have become bitter and aggressive after everything he endured. Instead, he chose to become a protector and teacher. After the ceremony, Clay found himself alone with Ranger in the bear's spacious habitat. The sanctuary's design allowed for these private moments, recognizing the special bond between them. Ranger approached the fence and sat quietly, his amber eyes reflecting the same trust and affection that had first captured Clay's heart in that abandoned ranger station. "She would be so proud," Clay said, thinking of Rebecca. "Not just of what we've built here, but of who you've become. You saved more than my life that day, buddy. You saved my soul." As if understanding, Ranger pressed his massive paw against the fence where Clay's hand rested on the other side. The gesture had become their ritual, a moment of connection that transcended the barriers between species, between past and future, between loss and hope. Sarah joined them as the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered sanctuary in shades of gold and pink. "The ultrasound showed the baby's healthy," she said, taking Clay's hand. "It's a girl. I was thinking we might name her Rebecca, if that's okay with you." Clay felt tears freeze on his cheeks as he nodded. "She would have loved that, and she would have loved you." The three of them, man, woman, and bear, stood together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the sounds of healing wildlife and visiting families. In the distance, the cubs Ranger had been teaching were practicing their snow-digging techniques, their playful wrestling echoing across the valley. "This is what love looks like," Clay said, watching Ranger carefully monitor the cubs' play while remaining alert to any threats. Not the easy kind that comes naturally, but the hard kind that chooses to protect even when it costs everything. As stars appeared in the clear Montana sky, the Morrison Wildlife Sanctuary settled into peaceful evening routines. Ranger would sleep outside the cub's den as he did every night, standing guard over the vulnerable. Clay and Sarah would return to their home filled with Rebecca's photographs and memories, planning for the daughter who would grow up understanding that family comes in many forms. The broken had indeed found each other, and in finding each other, they had discovered that love, real love, never dies. It simply transforms, growing stronger with each act of protection, each choice to heal rather than harm, each decision to trust despite having every reason not to. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about conquering enemies, but about choosing to remain kind in a world that often rewards cruelty. Ranger had taught them all that lesson, one gentle interaction at a time, proving that even the wounded can become healers if they're willing to let love guide their choices. Sometimes life breaks us in ways we never expected: the loss of a spouse, an empty nest, dreams that didn't unfold as planned. Clay Morrison thought his story ended when Rebecca died, leaving him drowning in debt and loneliness at 58. But then he found Ranger, a wounded bear who had lost everything too, and discovered that the broken can find each other and become whole again. Their bond teaches us that it's never too late for second chances, that family isn't always blood, and that sometimes protecting someone else is the only way to heal ourselves. Clay went from a man counting down to mandatory retirement with nothing but regrets, to building a wildlife sanctuary where love transforms trauma into purpose. He found new love with Dr. Sarah Chen, gained a surrogate family with Evelyn, and proved that our greatest chapters might be written in the years we thought were endings. Ranger showed him that resilience isn't about forgetting pain, it's about choosing compassion despite it. What seemed like the end of Clay's story became its most beautiful beginning. Have you ever found unexpected family or purpose during a difficult season of life? What wounded thing in your world might need the kind of protection that could heal you both? Share your story below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.